So welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this
Yeah.
interview with me today. I have Lily Nichols, the author of Real Food for Pregnancy. So ironically, I bought this book after hearing you on the Rob Wolf podcast and started sending it to my nutrition clients who are, I'm a nutrition coach, and so help people with their lifestyle choices and their nutrition goals. And when clients would get pregnant, we sort of were in this weird limbo space where we weren't fueling for performance. We weren't trying to lose weight. What were we doing? And so yours was the first real resource that I found where I was like, wow, this is, in line with what I believe. And then also gives us some structure to what you can include. So I started sending it to my nutrition clients and then clients who were working with their doctors on fertility treatments. And that was before I got pregnant. And then surprise, I got pregnant right before my husband left on deployment with our third, which my boys are 8 and 10. So it was a real surprise.
Wow.
And
You're like, this again. Okay.
So then I pulled the book out selfishly from myself and reread it. And it's kind of just reignited this fire for me of this is a very useful, helpful resource. And so I really wanted to get a chance to talk to you today and ask you some questions. And so I guess if you can just kind of introduce yourself and tell us where you are in the world and what brought you to writing this book in the first place. Just give us a little background.
Well, we're both in Washington State, I found out, so that's cool. My official title, I guess, is a registered dietitian and certified diabetes educator. But my focus and my practice has been pretty consistent throughout my career on prenatal nutrition, as well as gestational diabetes. And I've always personally been inclined to the real food ancestral health side of things. So, I'm one of those people who didn't go through my training with rose-colored glasses on. I was very thoughtful and critical of the information that I was being taught and kind of I don't know if I agree that we need 6 to 11 servings of grains per day, for example. So where do I go from here? I mean, my work has been in many different areas of the prenatal nutrition space, from working one-on-one with clients, public policy in the state of California, a bunch of different research projects, and of course, writing. I have Real Food for Pregnancy and Real Food for Gestational Diabetes. And I feel like my role in this space is to legitimize by citing my books with a crap ton of research that taking an alternative approach and using real food and a more nutrient-dense diet is a valid way to approach pregnancy nutrition. What I teach is very different than what the conventional prenatal nutrition guidelines are. And when you sway at all from what's standard of care, you just have to back your stuff like crazy with science. So I'm not the first person to be we need to eat more nutrient-dense foods during pregnancy. But I am the first who's really cited it with so much research to really legitimize that this is both safe and also efficacious just for supporting health during pregnancy, optimizing brain development for your baby, optimizing birth outcomes. The healthier mom is, the more choice you have in the way that you birth and the providers that you can work with in your pregnancy. So I'm just really passionate about helping moms have the easiest possible time with their pregnancies and healthiest outcomes.
Yeah. What did you see was the problem? You must have seen something that you were this is just not adequate. And that sort of prompted you to do all that research and write the book. What was the problem that you saw?
I'll probably have to rewind to the first book, because my first book was Real Food for Gestational Diabetes. And there technically shouldn't have needed to be a book written on gestational diabetes. There's been tons of information about nutrition for gestational diabetes out there for decades. The problem was that when I implemented the guidelines, which ironically I helped create or helped adapt when I worked with the state of California, in practice, they actually failed to control blood sugar levels in the majority of my clients. And nothing makes you feel worse as a clinician when your job is to help people manage and control a health condition and your advice makes it worse.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what led me to really question if the quote minimum level of carbohydrates that they say is required for pregnancy is actually evidence-based or not. And my conclusion is that it's not, and you have wiggle room to go lower carb, provided that you're doing it intelligently and still fueling yourself with enough nutrient dense foods so you're still meeting your micronutrient needs. But there's really no scientific basis for a minimum of 175 grams of carbohydrates per day, which is what our recommendations say.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, you kind of—
that was a recommendation for someone with gestational diabetes.
Even for gestational diabetes.
Wow. Yeah.
Which is crazy when gestational diabetes is literally carbohydrate intolerance of pregnancy. It's like, okay, you have failed a glucose tolerance test of somewhere between 50 to 100 grams of carbohydrates. Now we're going to give you that same amount of carbohydrates at every meal and expect that your blood sugar level is going to be normal. Like, what? It never really made sense to me, but it wasn't until I was really in practice that I started questioning mm-hmm. how much it didn't make sense and how much we could shift this. And so Real Food for Pregnancy came about because I got a lot of feedback from people who wanted a resource on prenatal nutrition that was not purely focused on blood sugar. Mm-hmm. And as I started writing that book, I mean, you just go deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole of all the things that are wrong with the conventional guidelines. Mm-hmm. So not only are like the carbohydrate recommendations, in my opinion, wrong, but also the protein recommendations underestimate the protein needs of pregnancy, which like we didn't even have direct evidence on until 2015. And they also underestimate the need for choline, and they underestimate the need for vitamin B12 and vitamin B6. And then where do you go to fill in those nutrient needs from food? Those are the foods we should be emphasizing in pregnancy. So it kind of just, the more you dig into the research, the more it just opens up Pandora's box and shows you how much room there is for improvement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I read it in your book, but it's one of the philosophies that I always tell people, which is that like without labeling foods bad or good, because that could just go on forever and ever and be gray. Like if you're having something that's not very nutrient dense, not only is that like not ideal, but you're probably displacing something.
Exactly.
Better. And I really like that concept when we're thinking about like pregnancy is like, if you're having crackers, like maybe that's not bad, but like, what are you missing out on that would be better? And I mean, as a nutrition coach and a professional, like in the fitness space, there really isn't a lot of resources out there for pregnant women. And most of the time people just want to be like, I don't know, like go talk to your doctor. But in the medical space, like you kind of feel like you get a list of everything you shouldn't have. Like you kind of feel like, oh, well, these are the 45 things I can't have. So I guess have like,
you're like, okay, bree's off the table, sushi's off the table, eggs with runny yolks are off the table. It's like all this stuff is off the table, but they don't tell you what to emphasize. And if they do, it's like, you need more carbohydrates for your baby's brain development. And it's like, okay, or like, you need more vegetables. You're like, yeah, duh. You know, so, and then you get into is it even evidence-based to recommend avoiding this huge list of foods? I mean, I devoted a whole chapter to that because that's up for debate as well. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I do think we need to be emphasizing more of what foods should you include more of versus focusing on all these things to avoid, because it really, I mean, women enter pregnancy fearful. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like you get that positive pregnancy test and then you're like, oh no, what do I need to change? Wait, what do I need to do differently? Oh my gosh, is that going to hurt the baby? And it gets people get very anxious about it. I mean, for good reason. The stakes are high, but the stakes are actually less high on like the foods to avoid side of things than they are on like just missing out on nutrient dense foods. And hey, you want to like try to fit those in early, because once the nausea and food aversion set in, which they usually do somewhere in the first trimester, you're not going to be getting a lot of nutrient dense foods for a little while until that stuff subsides. That's just, it's like a fact of pregnancy, you know?
Yeah.
So
I think the fear thing has been something that I've noticed for myself just in my past pregnancies, where I was actually living like, I mean, it was just a different life for me. Then I was active duty Navy, and I wasn't like, I didn't know anything about fitness and nutrition, you know, it was 10 years ago. And I ate really poorly. But I remember being afraid a lot and thinking like, oh, well, I can't have that because, you know, that'll give me listeria, or I can't have that, I'll get salmonella. I can't have that because it's not safe. Meanwhile, I was eating like Stouffer's mac and cheese like every night for dinner because I was like, this tastes good. And, you know, I'm pregnant, so I get a pass. I can do what I want. Right. These like really unhealthy pregnancies. And you'd think like 10 years later, like, working in nutrition and fitness, that I would feel like a little less scared. And I think it's less, but it's still there because most of the information out right now, and just in general, the common talk is the things you can't have, the things you shouldn't do, the exercise that's not safe,
right.
and what you should avoid. But meanwhile, nobody's telling you what you should eat.
Right. Well, all I can say is I hope that having more information on what to emphasize helps to ease some of the anxiety. Like when you actually look at what are the true risks associated with, say, eating eggs with runny yolks, for example, like the chances that an egg contains salmonella is so small. It's like 1 in 12,000 to 1 in 30,000, like 2% of foodborne illness outbreaks in the US are linked to eggs. 2%. Over half of them are related to fruits and vegetables. But nobody's telling you to avoid your spinach salad or to not have cantaloupe or to, you know, not eat pineapple. But you're a lot more likely to get sick from that than you are from eggs. And moreover, the eggs are actually a lot more nutrient dense than the fruit. Not that fruit is bad, it's just eggs are the #1 source of choline in the diet, which is really beneficial to brain development for baby and really beneficial to the health of your placenta and the nutrient delivery from mother to baby as well. So we have to kind of weigh like the relative risks and then also the benefits. So is there a nutritional trade-off if you avoid something? And then you get to like the exercise thing. I mean, the actual like risks of exercise in pregnancy are pretty slim. Like your body is going to tell you to stop. The only time when we end up with like a severe issue is studies where, you know, you have elite athletes who have been trained to like push past their point of comfort. Those are the ones who are a little more likely to overdo it. The other risks, meaning there's actually like noticeable like reduction in blood flow to the fetus or something like that. Most of the other risks are actually risk of like musculoskeletal injury to mom, not baby. Like the data on exercise is pretty strong that like moving is beneficial. You increase blood flow to the baby, which actually increases nutrient delivery and increases the excretion of wastes and other, you know, cellular byproducts that need to be removed, improves brain development of the baby, improves oxygenation. Like it's usually a good thing. The risks are more so like, are you going to overdo it and have too much pressure on like your pelvic floor and have a pelvic floor dysfunction issue later? Or are your joints, are you going to be doing something a little too high impact for your joints? Like just having proper form when you're doing something like lifting weights becomes more important. But is it actually risky to the baby? Like unless you're doing contact sports or something where you're risking a fall, it's actually not that risky. So,
like a body mechanics thing. Like, do you already have the mechanics in place to lift properly?
Exactly.
And yeah, I think you're spot on, and people should feel good about moving. They should feel good about, you know, like being active in their body and not be afraid. You know, when people get pregnant, at least this is, I think it's probably true for all of us in a way, you have this like a lot of women I think have two thoughts. One is, well, I want to take care of me and the baby, like whether that's food or, you know, resting or taking your vitamin, which is what most people just default to, is like, oh, I'm just going to take this one vitamin and then I'm covered. And then two, I don't want to gain a whole bunch of weight. Like
right.
Everybody says that. Can you talk a little bit about weight gain in pregnancy and just like the role that nutrition plays in that, and then how like bodies are different, how some people do gain more weight than others, and how does that work?
Yeah. Well, what I'll say is there's the amount of weight that's like correct, I guess, to gain does vary person to person. It also varies quite a bit based on like pre-pregnancy weight. There is some degree of it that is not within our control. Like some people naturally will gain 40 pounds in pregnancy, and some people will naturally gain 20. And then sometimes when you're working with women who have started their pregnancy at a heavier weight, sometimes they don't gain much at all, particularly if their nutrition is pretty dialed in, or if they're dealing with something like gestational diabetes where they have to keep their nutrition really dialed in, then you actually tend to see lesser amounts of weight gain. But what I found interesting in looking at this is there's actually, you know, if you look globally at the weight gain recommendations, they actually vary quite a bit. So like in the US, a woman starting her pregnancy at a healthy weight, they tell you to gain 25 to 35 pounds. If you go to other countries, actually the amount can be anywhere from 18 pounds to about 33 pounds. So there's a different range, and some countries actually recommend like a little on the lesser side of weight gain. As far as like how much that weight gain is within our control, I think it's somewhat up for debate. I think there's one camp that feels like there's nothing that you can do to impact your rate of weight gain. And then there's the other camp that thinks there is. And I think I tend to be somewhere in the middle. We do have data, and also just from my personal experience working with hundreds of pregnant women, the majority of them who started their pregnancy at a heavier weight, because a lot of my work was with gestational diabetes, and those things, not always, but they tend to more frequently go hand in hand. The lesser amount of carbohydrates you include in the diet, the lesser your insulin levels and the lesser your weight gain. And I have like all of these anecdotal stories, but also we have pretty good data on that as well in the literature. Of course, that comes with if you're eating less of this, what are you eating more of? And that typically means like, not only when you're eating less carbohydrates, it's not just like you're eating less sweet potatoes, but like sugars count towards that total. So like the greatest contributor to excessive weight gain during pregnancy is added sugars and refined carbohydrates. So like white flour products that are used to make, you know, breads and pastas and crackers and cereal and whatnot. Fruit juice also tends to count towards that category of added sugars. They're just, drink a lot of fruit juice, you're getting a whole bunch of sugar, you know, even though it's from fruit, it has the same amount of sugar ounce per ounce as soda, sometimes more. But when you're lessening the amount of carbohydrates, especially refined carbs, what are you eating more of? Like you're probably eating more vegetables, you're probably eating more protein, you're probably eating more healthy fats. And those tend to be more satiating, like you're fuller faster and fuller for longer. They tend to be better for your blood sugar balance. They tend to be higher in micronutrients, which have their own beneficial effects on regulating your blood sugar. They also tend to be higher in fiber, which is good for your microbiome, which plays a role in regulating your blood sugar. So it's all kind of interconnected. So I try to have people not focus too much on the weight itself and an exact number, but instead to focus on like, what are the things you are doing that are contributing to where you're at? You know, there are going to be points in your pregnancy where, whether you like it or not, you're just going to be gaining weight, and going to be gaining weight rapidly. Like that happens. It's hormonally regulated. Your food is not entirely responsible. Of course you're eating, so yeah. But there can also be, like, in terms of like the rate at which you gain weight, that does tend to be pretty related to the food side of things.
So it's not, and you know, with an ancestral diet, like the eating more protein and quality foods and more healthy fats means you're satiated. And so you're eating, you know, you're not overeating as often.
Right.
In pregnancy, is it the same? Like, is it the caloric balance that plays the biggest role in the rate of weight gain, or is it more of the blood sugar issue?
I think it's related to both. You know, technically, what's interesting, if you go to the calorie thing, like, it's always assumed that pregnant women need a whole bunch of extra calories, and it's actually not, the science isn't clear on that. Like, our need for micronutrients goes up, but the actual increase in energy needs, they usually say it's an average of about 300 calories. That's usually what I say as well, but some studies show it's as little as 70 extra calories per day, possibly because pregnant women tend to not be as active, like, by default. There's so much hormonally going on with your energy balance. I will say that again, probably because so much of my work is in gestational diabetes, I do see a carryover with blood sugar, big time. So like naturally in pregnancy, your blood sugar actually should run lower than outside of pregnancy. It runs about 20% lower than when you're not pregnant. Your insulin levels are actually higher. Now, how much higher your insulin levels are going to get is partly dependent on what you're eating. And so if you're eating a lot of carbohydrates that are driving your blood sugar up, your insulin has to match it. And that by default ends up resulting in more weight accumulation. It also plays a role in just your fluid retention as well. So the more carbohydrates you eat, the higher your insulin levels, the more fluid you retain. Which tends to be why, you know, when mamas are facing preeclampsia or high blood pressure, it almost always goes hand in hand with high blood sugar, whether or not they have an official diagnosis of gestational diabetes. Every single preeclamptic woman I've worked with, when I do a diet recall, it's like an excessive amount of refined carbohydrates or sugars. Wow. Every time. So the dietary information that I'd end up giving them would actually be very similar to somebody who has high blood sugar levels. And like, we don't know where their blood sugar was or not because we weren't necessarily testing, but it would bring their blood pressure down. So it's so many things are interrelated, and a lot of the answers tend to come back to food and lifestyle choices. Not always, but that's the area that I really try to shine a light on, that like pregnancy isn't something that just happens to you and like has to be miserable and has to be accompanied by a ton of weight gain that feels just so uncomfortable. Some of it is within your control. So let's just try to like stack the deck in your favor to make this as easy and like painless on your body as possible.
So so if we're talking about just carbs in general, like a good rule of thumb is like to not get your carbs from refined or processed spots. Like we want to avoid white, you know, refined flour. You want to get the majority of your carbs from vegetables, like, or, you know, occasional pieces of fruit. Yeah.
You know, vegetables, fruit, it depends how like people's interpretation of paleo or ancestral, but you know, dairy and legumes and nuts and seeds, like they're also going to have carbohydrates. They're just going to be in lesser concentrations than what you're finding in grains, and then of course especially refined grains. When they've looked at the research, actually the number one predictor of inadequate micronutrient intake in pregnancy is high consumption of refined carbohydrates. So that's like the biggest thing I try to drill into people. I think some people kind of assume that I'm like anti-carb or like recommending a zero carbohydrate diet or a ketogenic diet. And not necessarily the case. I mean, you can go really low carb if you need to. Like if your blood sugar isn't well controlled on a more moderately low carb intake, like you can do that and it's probably not going to be harmful if you're doing it intelligently. But I'm okay with carbohydrates. Like most people have some wiggle room for carbs, and it's not going to be a bad thing to have like some sweet potatoes, and it's not going to be a bad thing to have some fruit. And like your body definitely guides you to the things that you need more of. Like there will probably be times in your pregnancy where you'll just have like an insatiable appetite for oranges or something. Who knows why? I don't know. Maybe there's a huge vitamin C need in this particular phase of fetal development. Like who knows? I'm definitely pro, following your body's lead on this stuff. And the carbohydrate needs are just so individualized that it's hard for me to like give, a really strict level, but more so a paying attention to like, what are your activity levels? What's your weight gain like? If you're monitoring your blood sugar, what is that doing? What is your like mindful eating senses like telling you to do, and go for that and choose the most nutrient dense carbohydrates possible versus like automatically trying to go keto or something.
Right. And people who are like more active and exercising hard probably can tolerate more carbohydrates.
Absolutely.
And I guess a follow-up onto that is, if we're thinking about like carbs and are you getting the right balance of just the macronutrients, the carbs, the fat, the protein? The other end of the coin is like the micronutrients, which is like obviously the meat of, I feel like what I got out of this book are like these places that you can get micronutrients.
Right.
And I was curious from your perspective, like how would a person audit their micronutrients? Like, is there a method or a calculator or an app that you recommend for people to like plug in their food and say like, what am I missing in my diet?
Yeah, actually, Chronometer is the best option. It's free, or they have a free version. Like, same sort of deal as like MyFitnessPal or any of those trackers, except it calculates out your micronutrients too.
Is that an app or a website? Or both? Okay.
Yeah. I personally don't use the app on my phone, but I do, if I'm going to run a micronutrient analysis, I put it in on there.
And so it's similar, they would, like a person could put in what they're eating for a day, and it tells them how that breaks down micronutrient wise.
And then it'll also give you like calories and macros as well. What's nice about the macro part is it automatically calculates net carbs for you instead of showing you total carbs, which is what MyFitnessPal does. MyFitnessPal is also like so focused on weight loss that there's just like this excessive, you're constantly being pulled to like, oh my gosh, you're over your calories. Oh, you're over your carbs. It's like, I kind of hate the number centricness of it, but Chronometer, just the way that they have set it up is less about like counting and more, it'll show you all these different micronutrients. So like all your not all of them, most of your vitamins and minerals. And then you can actually set the like goal amount. If you want to look up like what's the RDA for vitamin B12 or something, you can set those to all be pregnancy specific, and it'll show you on like a bar graph what percentage you're getting.
That's amazing.
Food. So yeah. it's really useful. Unfortunately, they don't include choline. You have to kind of like calculate that from scratch, which is obnoxious, but they cover almost everything else.
Wow. And so, yeah, I use MyFitnessPal with a lot of clients for just tracking like a food journal. And I always tell them like, disclaimer, like ignore those goals, ignore whatever it's saying to you. Like we're not using it for that. We're using it as a journal.
Yeah. Check out Chronometer. I think the app on the phone might be paid. I'm not sure. Whereas MyFitnessPal is free. So there's a trade-off there, but yeah, it's a really helpful tool that doesn't force people into the numbers game too much.
Yeah. I like that because I think people can take responsibility for what they're eating. And even if you don't feel well, which I know for me personally, like it was a good wake up call because I got pregnant. I'm like, all right, I'm going to do it. Like, I'm a nutrition coach. Like, I'm going to nail it this time. And I felt awful in my first trimester. And
first trimester is rough.
And it made it hard to eat things that I wanted to eat. Like, I wanted to eat different protein sources and I just couldn't think about them. That sounded good was a hamburger. Like, I could do a hamburger, but everything else sounded terrible. And I felt frustrated with myself. And I think a lot of women do. When they're feeling sick and they want to eat something, but then they're like, I can't.
Yeah. Your experience is like, just, it always feels like I'm the only one who's been through this. This is so horrible. I want to eat well and I can't eat well. And like, that is the experience of probably 95% of pregnant women in their first trimester. There's just this period of time of like extremely rapid cell replication going on. Like, the embryo is doing its thing. The placenta is being created from scratch. You're basically growing a second liver. Like, that's really what the placenta is. It's a liver for your baby, but it's a big, complex organ that has a lot of functions, and it pulls a massive amount of energy. And then your blood volume's going up. You're like making more red blood cells, like this feeling of like deep fatigue that goes down to your bones. Like, it makes sense because literally your bone marrow is working overtime to make more red blood cells. Like, there's a reason people feel like garbage in their first trimester. Not to mention, like, the thyroid is doing crazy things. It's like ramping up production of thyroid hormones by 50%. That in itself is a theory that some researchers have to explain first trimester nausea. Like, placental hormones are actually like hijacking the thyroid to make sure that enough thyroid hormones are being transferred to the baby. Anyways, so there's a lot going on. Your pancreas is changing. Like, that's starting to produce more insulin to prepare for the insulin resistance that's going to hit in late pregnancy. So your blood sugar tends to dip low. So the cravings for carbohydrates are actually very normal and something I don't think should be ignored. What I try to emphasize in the first trimester is just like, try to do the no naked carb thing as best you can, just so you're not like crazy spiking and dropping and spiking and dropping all day long, because that tends to make the nausea worse. So what protein option can you have with those crackers or that piece of bread or that banana or whatever it is that's like getting you through the day? Like, is there a source of protein and or fat that you can have with it? And it might just be like cheese and Greek yogurt for a while, and then maybe some days you'll be able to do eggs, and maybe you'll get a burger in now and again. But it goes a long way. Nuts, those tend to be like pretty well tolerated. Cashews are like an easy one. But whatever you can get that's like not pure carbohydrate, like, just celebrate the tiny victories, even if it's like 3 cashews. And just move on. It's totally normal. There's a reason our bodies have nutrient stores built up, and particularly if you're a person who's been eating real food and focusing on nutrient dense foods pre-pregnancy, like, you have nutrient stores. They're there for a reason. It's gonna be okay. You'll hit a point where the symptoms will subside. The nausea usually subsides. The food aversions usually subside, at least somewhat. So you're able to eat greater quantities of good foods.
And in that case, like what we were talking before, like, for anybody listening, you don't have to, I mean, you're saying like, don't be so hard on yourself in the first trimester, like to do like a crazy audit and think that you should be forcing stuff down. Like, you do have to listen to your
Don't
body.
write anything down your first trimester. Just like get through it. It's survival mode.
Yeah. It's not,
really
not the time. But then, there is that balance of like, you feel better. So like, let's start giving your body the best, possible nutrition.
Right. I think when you start towing the line of feeling better, that's when you have to be like, okay, could I try some broccoli today? Like, if you've been totally averse to vegetables for a while, it might feel scary, especially if you've been throwing up from stuff, to like incorporate things. But like, can I try this thing a few bites and see if it sits well? Oh, it does? Okay. Because you can end up kind of on this like crazy carb monster train that goes the whole pregnancy. You really have to kind of remind yourself to check in on occasion and see how you're doing and see if you have a little more wiggle room to build in some more nutrient dense food.
I've noticed even in, and this is just anecdotal because it's just me, but like in my second trimester right now, I have a significant difference throughout the day. One, in how hungry I am, and two, like what I seem to want. Is there like science behind that, or is that just individual, you know, go with the flow of your body?
I mean, a lot of it is individual. For example, when I've worked with clients who have been vegan pre-pregnancy, like sometimes the things that people are averse to or crave are like the opposite for them. So like a lot of people are averse to meat in the first trimester. Excuse me. And I've talked to some vegans who actually crave eggs, they crave oysters, they crave seafood, they crave bone broth. Now this is not everybody, but it's like a significant amount of people where like their body is telling them they need more of some nutrients, where people who err more on the side of omnivorous paleo real food and have had enough animal products in their diet, they don't tend to have those cravings until a little later in pregnancy, probably when their nutrient stores have been more depleted and they need to fill them back up potentially. But we don't know for sure like why people have certain cravings or not. I like to think that our bodies have a reason for it. You know, there's actually a lot more nutrient synergy going on in food that I think we give credit to. There's such a focus on, people call it nutritionism. I believe Michael Pollan coined the term, where we focus on like single nutrients instead of looking at food as a whole. Yeah. So, you know, for example, if somebody is craving, well, this wasn't where I was going to go, but I'm going to talk about this anyways. Salt. So craving pickles, craving olives, craving chips, though craving deli meat, which is like, oh, you're not supposed to have deli meat, the listeria risk, which is actually like extremely minimal, by the way. Your body actually needs more salt during pregnancy. This is something that's missing from our conventional guidelines. Quite a bit more, like some data says maybe triple what a non-pregnant person needs, which makes sense because you have so many more fluids on board. Just your fluid volume in your bloodstream goes way up, not let alone, you know, you have your amniotic fluid as well. And when you have more fluids on board, you need more electrolytes. So maybe those cravings for salty foods are actually to fill a void. Could that be why salty foods tend to help with nausea? Like your blood volume is already increasing pretty early on in pregnancy. Maybe the salt cravings are part of it. Or cravings for dairy products in the first trimester tends to be really common. And I think some people who err on the paleo or maybe Whole30 side of things are like, oh no, I can't do dairy. And dairy, you know, even though people like to diss it, and it does, you know, it's something that not everybody can tolerate, it is pretty nutrient dense. And when you're not eating seafood, like dairy and eggs are the #2 sources of iodine in the diet. And that's like your iodine needs double during pregnancy. They're needed for that, your thyroid gland to produce more thyroid hormones. Like maybe it's that, maybe it's the calcium for skeletal development. Maybe it's the probiotics for your microbiome. Like we don't know for sure, but it seems like you can make a nutritional case for various cravings. And then of course there's like cravings that are not pregnancy specific. Like you start eating junk food, you're going to crave more junk food because the junk food manufacturers have intentionally put in like flavor chemicals and sugar and all this other stuff to make it hyper palatable. Like that's not pregnancy. That's just hyper palatable foods engineered to be addictive. But when you have cravings for specific real foods, I do think you can make a nutritional case for many of them.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so like tuning into what your body is craving is a good thing. And then as long as you've eliminated like the hyper palatable processed
Right.
foods, because those kind of confuse those signals anyway.
Yeah.
Um, and I like to tell people like to know the difference between what's a staple versus like what's like a rare occasion. Like, and
Right.
like having a muffin, I mean, that's not very nutrient dense for most of us, or like good for our blood sugar. If it's an occasion, like that's a once in a while thing rather than what you go
Right.
to every morning on your way to work. Like a sugar coffee and a muffin, totally different animal.
Yeah. No, I agree. Sometimes the more nutrition focused that people get, for better or for worse, it can lead to kind of like an obsessive,
Yep.
or maybe a like a guilt-inducing thing if you ever sway
Or
off track.
dogmatic.
Yeah, kind of dogmatic, you know, and it's all good to have this stuff top of mind, and it's also important to give ourselves some grace, because pregnancy is hard on your body and it's hard on your brain. There's so many changes going on. Your body is changing like crazy, and that can feel kind of out of control, and the symptoms that are coming your way might feel kind of out of control too. And food is I mean, food's delicious, and I think that's okay for food to be good and to have place in our world for things that sort of like nourish our soul, you know, like are part of a family celebration or tradition or something like that, and not be so like, oh my God, I ate some gluten, or like, oh my God, I had some sugar. Like, you're not going to make or break your diet with like an occasional indulgence of something. It really comes down to more of the patterns. So like, you know, the mornings you do have, say, a muffin and a sugary coffee, like one day of that isn't really gonna matter. Having that over the course of weeks and weeks and weeks and months at a time, you're probably just not going to feel very good, because your blood sugar is going to start out imbalanced from the beginning of the day. So I just try to really emphasize sort of incorporating more of these mindful eating approaches so you can check in with yourself and see how you feel.
What are some of your like favorite mindful eating strategies?
It honestly is more about consistently, and that's the hard thing for people, consistently paying attention to how you feel before, during, and after eating. So like thinking about what foods you're in the mood for, noticing your hunger and fullness cues. So like, how hungry are you? How much do you think you need to eat? As you start eating, what are the textures and flavors and sensations and smells of the food? Are you enjoying what you're eating? Because if you're not, nobody says you have to clean your plate. You know, you can stop mid-meal and be like, I'm kind of full, I'm going to put this away for later. Or this is not settling well in my stomach, I'm going to stop eating this and choose to eat something else. Like, you have permission just to listen to those cues. And then in the, you know, hours after eating something, noticing especially like how your energy levels are, how soon you're hungry to eat again, how strong those hunger signals are coming on. Are you like crazy ravenous? There's going to be times in pregnancy where that just happens because your metabolism is higher, you know, you're going to be hungry. But that feeling of, you know, insatiable hunger often follows like a blood sugar crash. So that would be something I might ask people to tune into if they had a muffin and a sugary coffee. Like, how were your energy levels? How soon were you hungry? How strong did the hunger come on? What foods were you craving? Because usually when you come off of a blood sugar crash, your body naturally craves a pick-me-up via more sugar, caffeine, or refined carbohydrates, right? So if that's the food that your body's like, I need this now, like, it might be a sign that the previous thing you ate wasn't quite balanced. And you don't have to like get all guilty about it or beat yourself up. You just go, oh, that's interesting. Maybe tomorrow, because I want to feel better and I want to have better energy, I'm going to try something different for my breakfast.
I like that.
Hey,
Those are good.
maybe it includes a muffin. Like, I don't care, but if you pair it with something that has more protein and fat, you're gonna lessen the blood sugar spike significantly and probably feel better.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe from there you'll be like, you know what, this muffin, I kind of don't really need this. I think I might try something else to go along with my eggs. Like, if you focus on how you feel after eating, it becomes less about like, I'm following somebody else's plan or I'm doing a good or a bad thing, and more like, I just want to feel good. So I'm going to eat this way because I feel good.
Yeah. And mindful eating is really that sort of internal reflection of like, you're choosing something, you're eating it and being aware of it. And then you're reflecting afterwards about what it did for you without judgment of like bad or good, but saying like, I don't feel well. Or like, I feel amazing. Like, you know, I think the hunger part for a lot of women when they're pregnant is super real, because you're like, I am so hungry, like I could just eat everything.
And then you wait till postpartum when you're breastfeeding and the hunger is like, it's like on a scale of 1 to 10, it's like an 11.
Yeah, it's been a long time, so I'm looking forward to that too, because it's been a long time since I did breastfeeding. I have like 1 or 2 more questions because I want to be respectful of your time, but this might be too simplistic. So if it is, that's okay. If you had to make like a checklist to put on someone's refrigerator, like a pregnancy nutrition, like I checked this box this week, like what are some food items you would put on there?
For sure, eggs.
Mm-hmm.
Those are vital. There's kind of like, unless you have an egg allergy, I think every pregnant person should be eating eggs.
Yeah.
I won't go into all the reasons, but eggs. I would put fish or seafood on there. I don't know if you want like amounts, but I'll just sort of list some.
Yeah, like if you were like, and again, like if somebody was gonna like look back on their week, like did I do a good job of like well-rounded pregnancy nutrition?
Yeah. Well, eggs, I mean, honestly, it doesn't have to be every day, but I think most days, if you can get 2 eggs in, you're going to meet like half your choline needs from that alone. You're much more likely to hit the mark if you get 2 eggs a day, and they're super satiating in the morning. Great source of protein. I would put like at least a couple servings of red meat on there. Really important for your iron, your B12, your zinc, your B6, a whole bunch of different nutrients, of course, protein, obviously. I would put, I'd want some of that to be like meat on the bone. So you're getting the amino acid glycine, which becomes very important in pregnancy for a variety of reasons, but
like a slow cooked piece of meat,
slow cooked piece of meat, like a pot roast or a stew or ribs. Those will give you a lot of basically the nutrients that support collagen synthesis, which is like, that's for your baby's skeleton, internal organs, hair, skin, nails, connective tissue, and then all of that for you as well. So like you're stretching skin on your stomach and your breasts. Your uterus has like 800% more collagen at the end of pregnancy than it did at the beginning of pregnancy. It's helpful for placental function. It helps your circulatory system adapt to the higher demands it's facing in pregnancy. It's just a really important nutrient. So some kind of slow cooked meat. I would put fatty fish and seafood on there. So trying to get some wild caught salmon or some sardines in there. I
love sardines, by the way. Everybody always teases
you do?
Me.
Good for you. So that's like they're just excellent. I mean, super low mercury, super high omega-3s. You got calcium in there if you get them canned with the bones, and they're extremely inexpensive compared to other types of fish. So like, if you like sardines, go for it. They're awesome. Definitely your green leafy vegetables. And that's going to be hard in the first trimester, but you do what you can. Let's see. If you do dairy, having some like fermented full fat dairy, like some good quality aged cheese or some yogurt or kefir. Excellent for your probiotics, for your vitamin K2, of course, your calcium and your other things. Let's see, what am I leaving off? Liver. I don't think it's something you have to consume every single week. It's something that gives you a huge nutritional bang for your buck for a very small quantity. So it's something that I personally hide in like ground meat dishes, or sometimes have pate. I usually make pate and then hide that in the ground meat dishes. But that's like it's essentially like a multivitamin. I mean, it's just crazy nutrient dense. You don't need huge amounts of it. In fact, you're probably better off having small amounts, but it's a food I emphasize because people need to be encouraged to eat it. And you're naturally never going to overeat liver. I've never had a client overeat liver. It is a self-limiting food. But trying to incorporate that into some sort of a ground meat dish, like a shepherd's pie or burgers or meatloaf or meatballs. There's recipes for a lot of those in the book. I'd say like maybe 2 or 3 times a month would be great. Once your food aversions are like settled, because it's not going to be something probably that you want to eat in your first trimester. And then I'll add like one more random one there. And again, this isn't like it's not like a complete meal plan. It's just like, these are the things that are especially nutrient dense that I especially want you to emphasize in addition to all the other things you're eating. Like, I don't need to emphasize fruit because people are already eating enough fruit. I don't need to emphasize grains because most people are probably eating enough grains. I don't really need to emphasize the carbs. Most people are eating enough of those, you know, but those probably will have some sort of a place in your diet as well. So the last food I'll mention would be either oysters or clams, and cooked, because that's actually a food that warrants a warning for food safety. Like 75% of our foodborne illness outbreaks in the US that are linked to seafood are because of raw shellfish. So like no oysters on the half shell, in my opinion. Like, if you want to take the risk, that's on you, but it's something that I don't condone. So we're talking like either cooked or canned oysters or clams. You look at the nutrient density on these and it rivals liver. I mean, it's off the charts high in B12, iron, zinc, selenium. Has some omega-3s, not as much as other seafood, but they're really nutrient dense, and you don't have to eat a massive quantity, but having some of those, maybe not every single week, but whenever you're in the mood, like, go for it. They actually surprisingly taste kind of
I bet most people don't have that at all.
No, most people don't have this stuff at all. So people get like weirded out when I recommend things like liver or recommend things like oysters. And, you know, if you go back like 50 years, 100 years beyond, and you look at what types of foods traditional cultures emphasized for pregnancy and people trying to conceive, it was shellfish, it was organ meats, it was a lot of these things we're just not eating much of these days. So I kind of don't care that people think it's bizarre, weird, or gross. I'm like, if I can encourage you, if you fit in like an ounce of liver in your entire pregnancy, like I still feel like I've made some sort of a victory. Like before we had iron supplements, before we had vitamin B12 supplements, that's how they treated anemia in pregnancy, was liver or liver extract. And it was very effective for very good reason, because it's high in a lot of these different nutrients that are important for preventing anemia, even beyond B12 and iron. So it's something that I just like, I kind of have to talk about, even though it grosses people out.
No, I like it. I think that's what I was shooting for, was like the list that belongs in your fridge that you're like, I haven't had that at all this pregnancy. Like, probably should go try it or hide it, but get it.
Yeah.
And the last question I had, and then I will let you go, is in regards to supplements, because you know, at your first prenatal appointment, most doctors want you to come off everything except your prenatal. And then that's supposed to be like your gold, you know, your prenatal is your source of all this nutrition.
Right.
Do you typically like recommend to your people to do something different supplemental wise, or is like sticking with a prenatal the way to go?
It depends on the prenatal, but most of them on the market are lacking. So funny, what I hear is a lot of people, like, they're on a prenatal plus folic acid, like, which is bizarre because pretty much all prenatals have an adequate amount of folic acid. Not to mention, you probably don't want folic acid. You probably want folate, such as methylfolate, so your body can utilize it better, which may be even more important depending on your genetics. But in addition to a prenatal, I often recommend extra vitamin D, since most prenatals are inadequate, an extra fish oil or DHA supplement. I'm sorry, the sun's coming in my window right now. So either fish oil or they also have like an algae-based DHA for people who don't like fish oil. So that'll get you your DHA, important omega-3 fat for fetal brain development. Those are definitely like the top three. I think most other things are optional or dependent upon what else you're eating in your diet. So somebody who's not eating a lot of animal foods, for example, or has known absorption issues, should probably be on an additional vitamin B12 supplement. If there's microbiome concerns or a history of like having GBS, which is a bacteria that can live in the vaginal canal, which isn't necessarily a good thing, sometimes normal, sometimes linked to adverse birth outcomes. You might want a prenatal probiotic supplement as well. So a lot of it really depends on the person, their lifestyle, what else they're eating, like collagen, for example.
A prenatal vitamin might not be like the all-encompassing umbrella that it's marketed as.
No, it's really not.
Self-audit and see like what you might be missing, or request like a blood draw from your doctor to just check like if you're deficient on anything.
It's really a prenatal is an insurance policy, and that's what I try to really focus on. It's like, it's an insurance policy in case your diet doesn't have enough. It's not a replacement. So like a prenatal might be additionally important in the first trimester, right? When you're not like, I'm averse to green vegetables, you know, which is a major source of folate. Like, you might want to really emphasize your prenatal, or might want to have a separate, if you can't tolerate your prenatal, then like have a separate folate supplement to take or something like that. But for the most part, a prenatal is in addition to what other stuff you're eating. The challenge is a lot of the prenatals on the market are just not very good. I mean, they're intentionally trying to keep costs low and trying to keep the pill count down. And that means they're often not using very good forms of nutrients that are well utilized. So like the folic acid instead of the methylfolate. I could give a bunch of different examples, but we just get down a rabbit hole. Or because they're trying to keep the capsule size or amount down, you just can't fit everything in optimal quantities in it.
One little pill.
No, I've never seen a 1-a-day prenatal that's adequate. Never. The closest I've seen is like a 3-a-day. And then even that is like not, you know, you're still going to be missing some things. So like most prenatals, for example, don't contain choline. And we talked about choline from the eggs, but like 94% of women in the US don't even meet our current recommended intake for choline. And we have some studies, like actually really good, high quality, randomized controlled trials in human pregnant women, not a rat study, showing we might actually need double that amount of choline. So that's something that's like, might be something important to supplement with if your diet doesn't have enough, and especially in people who don't eat eggs, and you're not going to find it in a prenatal because A, it's very expensive, and B, it's very bulky. It takes up a lot of room, which means more capsules, which people don't want to take. I mean, a lot of times when you're shopping for prenatals, you're like, you don't want to have a 3 a day or a 4 a day, or like Seeking Health, which is a great prenatal, that's 8 a day. You know, people are like, oh, I can't do that. It's scary and it's more expensive. But there's a reason for it. It's higher quality, has better forms of nutrients in more optimal quantities. So it's a tricky thing. I mean, I go over supplements in depth in chapter 6 of the book, and there's a link in there for downloading my prenatal vitamin recommendations, because it's really overwhelming, like what's on the market and what you can choose from.
That's really helpful, because I think most people just assume like the 1 a day is sufficient. So I am really grateful for you to have spent some time with me, and I learned a ton just from talking with you, and I feel like I have like some important takeaways just for me personally.
Awesome.
You know, I love oysters, but I haven't touched them since I got pregnant, and so I usually do oyster shooters not pregnant, so I'm gonna try to crack some down and cook them up. But
yeah, they have, you know, just a random aside on that, I noticed at my grocery store they had frozen mussels. So they're like pre-cooked out of the shell, but frozen. And they were like really good. I made like a soup and incorporated some mussels in it, and it was like delicious. You know, it's like making like a seafood stew sort of thing. And the canned ones are good too. The texture is very soft, but the canned smoked oysters are like,
maybe I'll try those too, because I like the canned sardines, so maybe I would like the canned oysters too. I find for me, like if I want to incorporate something weird or, you know, more hearty, like breakfast is my best time to do it, because I'm hungry and like, you know, I feel good. And so like I make giant like breakfast hashes almost with like vegetables and eggs and like whatever else I want to throw in there. And so I'm gonna add some of these things into my breakfast.
I don't know about like an oyster omelet, but like you do you.
I will try it. I'll let you know if an oyster omelet is good. It wouldn't surprise me. But I will definitely in the blog post include your links. But how can people like learn more about what you do, or follow you, or get connected with you, or get your book?
So my main website is lilynicholsrdn.com. That has my blog, information about my books, and links out to their links on Amazon. I'd say the best place to follow me. Oh, and also on the site, I have the first chapter of Real Food for Pregnancy for free if you want to download and read that and just get more background on like the whys and the hows of real food nutrition for pregnancy. As far as social media stuff, I think we talked maybe before we were recording, but Instagram tends to be where I'm most active, but I'm also on Facebook and Twitter, and my handle's at Lily Nichols RDN.
Cool. Well, I'll definitely include all of those in the blog post. And I know any of my clients or world who's pregnant, I've already recommended your book, and
thank you.
People who participate in my my pregnancy program, which is mostly about like clearing up, you know, some of these like common fears and giving people information so they can be empowered. And so that'll be your book will be included in that resource as well.
Thank you.
So they can have that. But yeah, thank you so much for your time. I learned a ton. The sun's shining on me too. See, the Washington State, the sun is here. It shined on you.
I know the sun is here. it was so cloudy. I was like, I'm not gonna cover my shades. It's nice to have natural light. And then of course I'm like blinded, but
yeah, no, it just came out here too. So, well, thank you again. And hopefully I'll run into you sometime somewhere in Washington. That would be fun.
I know, I hope so. Take care. Thanks.
Okay. Bye-bye.